And this is given by Akamai and Richard Meeus, Director of Security Technology and Strategy, Europe, Middle East and Asia. And he is the Director of Security Technology with more than 20 years experience. He's an industry expert in cloud computing, enterprise software and network security. And his presentation is, have you been breached yet? My front-up message on this presentation is, you don't know what you don't know.
Absolutely. That's why it's
Welcome.
Are you sure? And thank you very much for the introduction. And I think it made it clear that I'm not an auditor. So this isn't trying to catch you out. Not an auditor, there's not going to be a test. What I want to do today is to spend some time with you going through some new threats and some new techniques to help you sort of think about how you would react if you had a breach. Because realistically nowadays it's going to be a question of when and not if you get breached. But first of all, I want to spend a 1 minute on who is Akamai. This will give you a bit of color and understanding around some of the numbers and the figures that we'll use in the course of the presentation. So Akamai is the world's most distributed cloud services provider. And we have leading solutions for compute, so edge compute, cloud compute, and also delivery. Delivery is the ability to deliver your website, to deliver video on demand. We have 4,200 POPs around the world, sort of magnitude bigger than any other provider in that space. What this means is that we can deliver your website to anybody on the planet faster and more efficient. We can deliver video on demand faster and more efficiently. We're gearing up to be very, very busy in the next few months with Qatar 2022. That's going to take a lot of resources and energy to make sure that you can enjoy all that streaming video the time you want it. And also security. And this is what we're going to be talking about today. Because with 4,200 POPs and the ability to probably take about a third of the internet on every daily basis, we are essentially one network hop away from about 95% of the world's population. This means that your customers, when they visit your website, get a very rich, very positive experience. It also means the bad guys, when they're trying to hit your website, the first thing they see is an Akamai node. So I still feel like we're in 2020. I don't really feel like we've evolved over the last couple of years, and we're just having a third attempt at 2020. I feel like we're stuck in a sort of revolving door. But I think if we, in terms of the way we've progressed in our social events and whatever, I think the cyber criminals haven't. They have progressed. They've taken advantage of our new mobility that we have and our increased fascination for IoT devices. And none more so than in ransomware, where we see encryption and then exfiltration of data. In fact, they've excelled themselves now, and they now have a quad play of ransomware: exfiltration, encryption, and then they'll put a DDoS attack on you to make sure you pay. And if you still don't pay, they'll make sure that everybody knows by telling all your suppliers, all your distributors, all your customers, just how much of a predicament that you're in. So I want to share some data around application attacks, because these are one of the ways that can lead to a breach. So just pulled out some data from Q3 2021. As I said, Akamai sees a huge amount of traffic around the world, so it gives us a good spread of traffic around EMEA. Now, I know this is a little bit small for this one, but you can see it's sort of middling around sort of 10 million attacks in EMEA per day. And the normal attack types, cross-site scripting, SQL injection in yellow, and then the biggest one, local file inclusion in orange. Local file inclusion has taken over as being the predominant, or the main dominant attack vector from SQL injection attacks. SQL injection attacks are great at dropping a database, but LFI can actually get you into the network. Getting into the network gets you a lot more bang for your buck. If you now look at what happened in Q3 to date this year, that's some increase in the course of a year. That's just in EMEA. Even if you take out that big spike we had towards the end of August, that's still at least a doubling. And local file inclusion is making up the bulk of that, and that's what allows people to get onto the network. primary, well, I think the most common method of getting into somebody's network, to breach a network, is through phishing. This is an example of a phishing attack. Can anybody spot the link? I know you're all security professionals. I'm sorry if you're at the back, you've probably got no chance of seeing this. But can you see what is wrong with that link? Anybody? No hands? The dot. The dot underneath the A. That's it. 1 pixel difference. 1 pixel difference in the URL. And this is using a technique that's called IDN homographs. It's basically taking a character from a different character set and putting it inside the domain name. So 1 pixel difference. Pop quiz, anybody know what language this one comes from? No? Vietnamese. Well, good guess. Now, when you look at the complexity of this and how clever, I mean, we do a lot of work with our employees in telling them how we need to look out for weird and random domain names. But a pixel difference is going to make that a little bit harder. And another question would be, can anybody remember or see what the similarity was between the hacks on Twitter a couple of years ago and the hack on Cisco a couple of weeks ago? So if you remember, the hack on Twitter was quite a very, very popular one, very funny one, because it managed to get people like Barack Obama and Elon Musk sending out tweets saying, send me your Bitcoin and I will double it and send it all back to you. And quite a lot of people believed it, they did, and funnily enough, didn't get their Bitcoin back. And also the Cisco attack was similarly embarrassing, but the similarity between the two is that, as you'd expect, corporate accounts were hijacked and they got into the network. How did they get into the network? Well, these organizations had MFA, so how did they get bypassed? Well, what's called, and it's not a very snappy acronym, but it's FAS, Phishing as a Service. And this is how you get an MFA bypass. And what this is that this is why it's important that, yes, you should have MFA in your corporate world. You should always have MFA, but remember that it's not all the same. And it's not a panacea. It's not a magic bullet for solving all your problems for account verification. In a normal situation, though, by the way, this is a very, very stylized version of actually what happens. Don't take this as an exact replication. When you want to access a website, whether you're one of your internal service websites or something like that, you'll make a request to the website will respond back to the MFA token or OTP password or whatever and ask for that response. And you will look at your phone, hit the push, or you'll type in the OTP, back to the website, and you're in. That's how it's supposed to work. Nice and simple, two-factor authentication, everyone's happy. What happens in a phishing attack is you'll get directed to a phishing website that could be used in the IDN homograph attack we saw on the previous slide. So you think it looks identical to the site you normally use. Somebody's probably rung you up and said, oh, we're just doing some internal testing. I'm John from IT, we're just going to do the test. Can you just quickly log on? So you go along to the website, you log in, you put in your username and password. That is then captured by the attacker. They send it through to the legitimate website. The legitimate website sees that response and sends the response back to the MFA. And the MFA, because you are thinking you're logging on to a normal website, so you just do your push or you type in your OTP, and now the bad guys have got access to the website. It's that simple to get through. So without any controls between the website and the 2FA token, it's very easy to get phished by this man-in-the-middle attack. So what you need to do is you actually need to link the website or the application you're going to with 2FA. And this is something that's called FIDO2, Fast Identity Online. And you either physically or cryptographically link these two machines, the website and the two-factor authentication. And that's commonly done by something like a YubiKey, or it can be done cryptographically on your phone. Because I'm sure you've all lost thousands of YubiKeys and MFA tokens and RSA tokens in your life. So yes, you must use MFA, but understand the risks behind all the different types. Next, we want to talk about an organization that's been particularly good at ransomware. So the Conti Group, formed in 2020, out of Russia, came out of the Ryuk ransomware group. These guys were very, very successful in 2021. I think according to Chainalysis, they made about $180 million. In sort of February, March this year, there was this Twitter page came up, at ContiLeaks, and it was an employee, sort of, who was dumping information about Conti onto the internet. And they were aggrieved about the Conti support of Russia in the Ukraine conflict. What that information contained was TTPs about how Conti did their work. It had internal IP addresses, manuals, processes, everything there was to know about how Conti acted as an operation. And one thing was critically clear, it's a business. These guys have got a CEO. The individual operators that they're bringing onto the platform, they're making $100,000 a pop. And what Conti did to make this effective is they gave the guys a manual. This is how to hack a network. Step-by-step guide. And this is part of that. I know there's a QR code on here, and this is a security conference, and therefore I probably should be shot for this, but that QR code goes to a really good blog that we wrote on this. And it's not ungated, so there's no username or password capture or anything like that. But it's a really good blog that goes through the entire detail of the processes that were used by Conti to hack somebody's network. Because it had this step-by-step guide, it was very easy, and it was very simple. The idea was you go onto the network, you dump as many creds as possible, you move on to the next machine, you dump as many creds as possible, and you keep on wash, rinse, repeat until you get the entire network. You don't encrypt until the very last minute, because as soon as you encrypt, the game's up, everybody knows you're there, lights flash, bells ring, and the game's up. So what this then allowed us to do is to really understand the techniques in terms of the kill chain, about what we can do to protect ourselves at various instances. And the tools these guys used, there was no fancy zero-day attacks. They were using stuff that we've known about for years. PSExec, Mimikatz, Eternal Blue, all the stuff that we've known about. So there wasn't a radical new invention of stuff. But when you actually look at where they were successful, this is just EMEA. So this is a report we've just produced today, which goes into detail about the Conti attacks in EMEA. UK is number one, so it's good to know that we can be number one in Europe for something. And we had well over a quarter of all the attacks in EMEA. This is all the successful ransomware attacks in EMEA by Conti Group. Interesting thing is when we start looking at the verticals, when we break down the verticals where Conti were successful. Can anybody think what would be the most successful vertical for a ransomware company to go after? Any thoughts? Health service, that's a good one. That's a good one. Not far. Manufacturing. Manufacturing and business services were the two most popular areas. Healthcare was there, down the bottom. Finance is there as well. That's down the bottom as well. The important thing is this is successful. Now, one of the things that's quite interesting about this is that finance was attacked. But finance has had a cyber attacks and been dealing with cyber attacks for years. So they've got lots of rigor and process to protect themselves. Manufacturing and business services, less so. They're a bit of an easier egg to crack. But it's worth really understanding, especially with the attacks on business services, that this is your supply chain. This is people who are providing you with services. And if they get into those organizations and compromise those machines, then they're going to get into your networks. So is it time we need to think about assume breach? So what this means, this was brought out a few years ago when the concept of, there's a lot of ransomware attacks, a lot of big breaches, and people said, well, maybe we should just say we are breached. Maybe that will give us a better way of reacting, a better way of understanding to that. And it doesn't really need to be fatalistic. This is the whole point. If we assume breach, we can make it so that a breach is a triviality and not the situation when your CEO is standing in front of the BBC explaining that it was a nation-state attack when it was really just a SQL injection attack. If we assume breach, we can start putting the tooling in place. We can start understanding what we would do if we were breached. And if we can do that at the right time, we can make an actual breach be trivial. And one of the ways we can help think about that is like, if you're in a submarine and the hull is breached, maybe by a landmine, or you hit another rock, or you hit something, then what's the next thing you see? You see, especially in the films, and extra bonus points if you can remember what this came from. What's the next thing you see? You see submariners running around the boat as fast as possible, closing doors, securing bulkheads. And what is it they're actually trying to do? They are segmenting the boat into smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller sections. The reason being is that if they can contain that breach into the smallest possible part, there's a good chance that they can then secure the ship, surface, and then they can repair the leak, get back to shore, whatever, and carry on. If they don't secure the bulkheads, water gets everywhere, bad things happen quickly. So the idea is, how can we make it so this sort of thing of having bulkheads through an organization can help us protect us against breaches? And the way that we find it most effective is something called microsegmentation. This is like having lots of bulkheads around your organization, but not doing like a firewall. Maybe like a mini firewall, but on every single workload. If you put a mini firewall that's a very intelligent firewall on every single workload, what that allows you to do is to segment your network so granularly, so finely, that if one machine gets compromised, one machine gets compromised. And that's it. Rather than one machine gets compromised and then your network gets compromised. So if we accept that breaches are going to happen, they don't have to be catastrophic. So what would you do? I asked this on a webinar a few weeks ago. I said, what would you do if you actually had a breach today? Would you pull the cables from the router? Would you switch everything off, call your MDR, your incident response provider, or call your insurance company? Or, hold my beer, I got this. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you. But half the respondents said they were going to switch everything off, pull the cables from the router, hide it under a desk, and hope it all blew over. 26% actually had an incident response plan in place. They knew what they were going to do, and they had the services in place. But half the people didn't have a clue what to do. They had no plan in place. So this is what we want to try and do. We need to get to a situation where breaches can be done can be handled and can be managed as simply and as easily as possible. So they become a trivial event. And things like microsegmentation, putting that intelligent bulkhead on every single workload, is a really, really fast and efficient way of being able to do that. So thank you very much. I'm going to give you a couple of things of what we talked about today. So we talked about phishing. Akamai can help you with things like secure web gateways and FIDO2 MFA. We talked about application attacks. So we can help you with web application and API protection. And then breaches and ransomware, we can assist you with microsegmentation. I'm going to be outside for the rest of the afternoon with the rest of my team. We're at booth 4. I'd love it if you came and have a chat with us, either before or after the beers come out. And with that, thank you very much indeed.